Most of you will have seen the footage emerging from France over the last week or two of ordinary people wearing yellow vests, blocking roads, protesting and being attacked by the police. But these mass protests by ordinary people have pushed French President Emmanuel Macron onto the back foot. He's had to back down on the proposed fuel tax. We need the same kind of movement in Ireland. The Yellow Vest movement began as an online petition. You see, Macron was trying to introduce a new stealth tax on working class people by claiming it was against climate change. But if we want to tackle climate change, and we should tax the fossil fuel corporations, not impose regressive taxes on ordinary people. The petition against the tax was so successful that there was 1 million signatures, and so protests were called. On the 17th of November, 150,000 people across France took part in protests which marched to town centres, which blocked roads, which occupied roundabouts. The protesters were wearing the yellow vests that French motorists have to by law have in their car. It was a way of representing that the movement was a movement of all the ordinary people. They even occupied the toll booths on motorways so that cars could drive through for free. On the 24th of November, there was a march of thousands down the Champs-Élysées in Paris, which was attacked violently by the police. And there's a lot of footage on the news of how violent the protests are. But the first thing to point out is how the news media works. They will take selective footage of a minority of protesters burning a car and say that it's representative. That is not the case. And on the other hand, sitting down and blocking roads, occupying toll booths or roundabouts is not a violent action, it's civil disobedience. It's the state that decides to then create and escalate violence by attacking those peaceful protesters. Civil disobedience, militant civil disobedience is peaceful protest. And also, when you look at the poverty figures for France, there is a structural violence imposed by the French state on the working class of France. 8.8 million people in France live in poverty. There's been decades of cuts to public services, decades of neoliberalism, of Thatcherism, of privatisation, of the hollowing out of working class communities. There's been a devastation of public transport, which means people in the smaller rural towns have to use their cars, which is why they're so furious that Macron would tax them. He cuts public services, and people like him have cut public services. They force people into their cars and then punish working class people for driving cars. And Macron's government were frightened by the protests, frightened of the prospect that they might link up with the strike movement we saw last year and the year before, frightened that they might link up with striking school students. And although this movement has many strengths, it also has some weaknesses. A lot of the people participating in the Yellow Vest protests have never taken part in a protest before. And so in that confused atmosphere, the far right have tried to infiltrate the protest movement. They're not representative of the movement as a whole, which is overwhelmingly a working class movement, but they're trying to snake their way in. But what did they offer the movement? What does Le Pen and her millionaire backers offer the movement? Nothing. Instead of directing people's anger against the system that causes poverty, they want to direct people's anger against immigrants. Far-right poison will destroy the movement before it can really challenge French capitalism and really challenge Macron and the system that lies behind him. The footage last week that showed Red Vest union members joining the Yellow Vest protest, being applauded by the Yellow Vests as they joined the protest, that's what we need to see. By linking up with the left and the trade unions, by linking up with angry workers who are just as pissed off about privatisation as the Yellow Vest protesters. The Yellow Vest movement can move beyond street protests and to escalate into a general strike. You see, when you shut down the economy, the ruling class listen. But how do we get a movement like that in Ireland? We see a movement like the Yellow Shirts can happen here, because only 4 years ago it did happen here. The water charges movement saw people in every community across this country engaging in direct action to stop the imposition of water meters. They were even attacked by the police on many occasions. We saw every group on the left, all the different political parties, most of the trade unions and community groups unite to form the Right to Water umbrella, which saw 120,000 people on the streets. The population of this country is only 5 million. Our water protest of 120,000 would be like having 2 million people on the streets of Paris. The Take Back the City movement shows that there's still an appetite out there for direct action, for occupations of houses. There's a new radical movement rising in this country against the housing crisis. And there's a national mobilisation of the Housing and Homelessness Coalition called for spring. With a good run in, we can make that protest 30,000 strong. And then argue within that protest movement to move to occupying bridges, to occupying roads. Ireland can build a Yellow Vest movement. We can build a revolt on housing that puts Leo Varadkar on the back foot. And if that movement links up with striking nurses and striking workers, organised workers, links up with the left and the wider working class, we can not only win on housing, but we can challenge this rotten system once and for all.